When the Johto region was first imagined, it was meant to feel older than Kanto, as if time itself had taken root there. The map was drawn with softer outlines, fewer sharp corners, and longer paths that curved like rivers. The design team said they wanted the world to feel lived in, a place where history wasn't told through text, but through silence. Every building in Johto was placed according to the idea of inheritance, something passed down rather than newly built. Ekritik's city was designed first, its architecture setting the tone for everything else. The roofs leaned like pagodas, the color palette muted with browns, purples, and gray. The art director said that Johto was the region that remembers, and every detail, from the moss on the temples to the slow rhythm of its music, reflected that. The day and night cycle introduced in gold and silver was a direct result of the developers observing how children played. They noticed that players often came home from school in the evening and wanted the game world to mirror that quiet time of day. To achieve it, they programmed a 24-hour internal clock, a feature that required a new battery inside the cartridge. It was the first Pokemon world that lived even when players weren't there. The passing of time became a part of its identity, from evolving certain creatures at night to the light changing gently across the sprites. When the remakes arrived years later, the lighting artists said their goal was to capture that same feeling: warm afternoons, cold mornings, and cities that blink like memory. Johto was the first region designed to be geographically connected to another. Instead of building a new world in isolation, the team linked it to Kanto, creating one continuous landmass. This choice was unprecedented at the time, made purely from passion rather than practicality. The lead programmer, Shigeki Morimoto, famously compressed the game's code so tightly that the entire Kanto map could fit inside the same cartridge. He said he folded data like origami to make space. Players who reached the end and discovered that they could cross the border into a familiar land often described it as one of the most magical surprises in gaming. The music of Johto carries a sense of nostalgia, not just through melody, but through instrument choice. The composer Junichi Masuda used flute and bell-like tones to represent tradition, with softer percussion to symbolize the passing of time. The Ekrutiak theme and the route music were written in the same key intentionally so that players moving between them would never notice the change, a seamless emotional transition hidden in plain hearing. In the remakes, the Heart Gold and Soul Silver arrangements reused the same scales, but added real chime samples recorded from a Kyoto temple, deepening the spiritual tone. Each route's number in Johto was chosen to continue Kanto's pattern, but the starting point, 29, was symbolic. It represented continuation rather than reset. The number 28 was intentionally skipped to represent the invisible border between old and new. The programmers said that the line between regions was the space where nostalgia lives. Even the Pokemon League itself, placed at the mountain's peak between the two regions, symbolized balance, not dominance, but coexistence. In the original drafts, Johto was called West Kanto, and the early maps showed more farmland than forests. It was redesigned after the team visited rural areas around Kyoto and Nara, where shrines stood among rice fields. That mixture of the sacred and the domestic became the region's defining aesthetic. Small shrines appeared near routes, stone markers stood beside ponds, and NPCs often spoke about their ancestors. The dialogue was deliberately reflective, encouraging players to think about history rather than only progress. The Pokegear, one of the most beloved tools in the series, was created to embody the connection between people and time. It combined a phone, a map, and a clock, all built around the idea of routine. The phone feature was inspired by the idea of trainers checking in on each other, mirroring the developers who called each other nightly while testing builds. Every NPC who calls you in the game was written to express gratitude, humor, or small slices of daily life. The designers said those calls were the heartbeat of Johto, reminders that the world keeps going even when the player rests. The legendary beasts were designed as living metaphors for life, death, and rebirth. The story says they perished in the burning of Ecruteak's tower and were revived by a divine force. Each one represents a stage of the cycle, one embodying the storm that destroys, another the rain that cleanses, and the last the sunlight that renews. Their designs were based on mythological guardian animals, but their colors were chosen for mood: deep red for passion, yellow for warning, and blue for sorrow. Players encountering them in the wild often experienced frustration because they fled instantly, but this was intentional. It mirrored the fleeting nature of miracles, glimpses of something greater that disappear before you can grasp them. The connection between the towers of Ecruteak was symbolic as well. The bell tower represented aspiration and divine communication, while the burned tower represented human error and consequence. They were drawn as opposites, one reaching upward, the other sinking into ruin. The story of the towers is one of humility, showing that even devotion can lead to destruction when pride intervenes. Johto's starter Pokemon were designed to be simpler and more natural than Kanto's. The design team said they wanted them to feel like creatures that could exist in the forests and rivers rather than engineered species. The grass starter was inspired by prehistoric reptiles and represented calm growth. The fire starter was drawn from small carnivorous mammals, symbolizing curiosity. The water starter embodied adaptability, capable of thriving in both river and ocean. Together, they represented evolution through harmony rather than conflict. Mount Silver, the highest peak in the Pokemon world at the time, was created to represent solitude. It was deliberately empty, no towns, few trainers, only silence. The final battle there was not written to feel like triumph, but reflection. The opponent waiting at the top had no dialogue, no fanfare. The developers said that the silence was the true ending, a mirror to the player's own growth. The mountain's design used darker tiles and deeper shadows than any other map in the game, emphasizing that even achievement can feel lonely at the top. The ruins of Alph, one of Johto's strangest locations, was inspired by the fascination with ancient languages and puzzles. The Unknown were designed to mimic letters, but they were also meant to feel alive, a language that speaks back. The puzzle music uses reversed sound clips of human speech, giving it an eerie, half-understood tone. The inscription that reads, "Our words shall remain here for eternity," was written as a statement about the game itself, that memory and mystery are timeless. Johto's Elite Four chambers were designed with nature in mind. Unlike the mechanical rooms of Kanto, these were drawn with stone floors, vines, and water features. The art director said they wanted Victory to feel grounded in the natural world. Even the Champion's Room included subtle golden particles that shimmered like pollen. It was meant to feel warm rather than intimidating, a contrast to the cold, futuristic aesthetic of later regions. The story's emphasis on passing time extended even to Pokemon evolution. The idea that certain species could only evolve through friendship or through trading was connected to Johto's theme of trust. The developers said that growth through bond was the region's moral heart. The Pokédex entries reinforced this idea repeatedly, describing cooperation, partnership, and balance as greater than power. Even small details reflect this philosophy. The berry trees, one of Johto's quietest features, were created because the developers wanted players to have a reason to revisit routes. The act of planting and returning symbolized patience. It was the first system in Pokemon where care produced tangible reward, a small cycle of nurture embedded in a game about battle. And beneath all of it, the region's map was drawn to resemble a phoenix spreading its wings. This was intentional, the idea that the land itself had been reborn from fire, rising as something gentler, wiser, and more aware of its own fragility. It was a hidden motif that few noticed, but the artist said that once you saw it, you could never unsee it. Johto was not built to surpass Kanto, but to heal it. Johto's development team often described their world as a handwritten sequel. They built it not from blueprints, but from sketches drawn on graph paper, each route penciled by hand before being scanned into a grid editor. Many of those sheets still exist in Game Freak's archives, their edges smudged from years of use. On one, a note reads, "The trees must feel older than us." That phrase became a silent rule for the region, its forests drawn dense, its colors warm, its roads lined with quiet decay rather than shining progress. The Pokédex entries of Johto were intentionally more emotional than Kanto's. The writers said they wanted to treat Pokemon not just as data, but as stories. Each entry was written with a verb that described life, sleeps, hides, listens, dreams, so that reading them would feel like watching, not measuring. This shift in tone changed how players perceived the world, turning the Pokédex into a diary rather than a catalog. Johto introduced the concept of held items, a small mechanic that transformed the entire battle system. The idea came from observing how animals use tools or carry objects for protection. The team wanted Pokemon to express individuality beyond moves. A single berry or claw became a form of personality. This also allowed subtle storytelling, one creature carrying a soft sand from its home, another keeping a shell that reminded it of the ocean. Every item became a quiet piece of world building, disguised as a number. The gender mechanic was another quiet revolution. It was inspired by the desire to make the world feel natural, to show that species could reproduce rather than appear from nothing. The decision to introduce breeding was controversial at first, as some developers worried it would complicate lore. But the lead planner insisted that life needed continuity. The world must feel like it grows on its own. Daycare was chosen as the setting because it symbolized kindness. The act of leaving Pokemon in someone's care reflected trust rather than science. One of the earliest prototypes of Gold and Silver featured over 200 creatures, many of which were cut due to space limitations. Some of these designs resurfaced years later in different generations, a creature resembling a baby form of Meowth, another early concept of a bat that would later evolve into Crobat, and even a grass dinosaur that would inspire a future starter line. Fans who later uncovered these unused sprites through data mining described the discovery as seeing fossils of ideas. The first shiny Pokemon was created by accident. When testing the color palettes for the Game Boy Color, the team needed a way to ensure that swapped hues wouldn't corrupt sprites. They added a random color variation generator, and when a rare combination appeared, it shimmered differently on screen. Someone suggested turning that glitch into a feature. The encounter rate was set extremely low, 1 in 8,192, a number chosen not for symbolism, but because it made the discovery feel like a dream. Johto's mythology was written around the concept of duality. The Twin Towers represented balance, the legendary beasts represented rebirth, and the two guardians represented the forces that keep heaven and earth in harmony. The flying guardian was associated with ascension and empathy, the other with meditation and rain. Their relationship echoed yin and yang opposites, defined by connection, not conflict. The game's titles themselves reflected this balance. Gold symbolized light and prosperity, silver symbolized reflection and calm. The radio system was one of the most overlooked innovations in the entire series. It was created because the team wanted sound to feel alive, not static. Every station was coded as a different frequency band within the same soundtrack engine. This meant the game was technically mixing multiple pieces of music simultaneously. When players tuned between channels, they were actually sliding through overlapping compositions. The music of Johto, in that sense, was not linear, it breathed. The game's internal calendar was based on a 7-day system mirroring the real world, but every day had a hidden keyword in the code: light, leaf, flame, song, stone, dream, and echo. These keywords had no effect on gameplay, but served as reference points for the writers when building dialogue. Each day's conversations subtly matched its mood. Light days had cheerful trainers, dream days favored introspection. It was an invisible poetry woven into the structure of time. Johto's map contains more water than land by tile count. This was intentional. The designers wanted the player to feel surrounded by reflection, both literal and metaphorical. The region's rivers run in wide curves, almost looping back into themselves, symbolizing continuity. Even the ocean routes near Olivine and Cianwood were drawn without hard edges, fading gradually into darker blues to evoke depth. It was the first region to feel less like a grid and more like a painting. The character of Professor Elm was based on the idea of a nervous scientist rather than a wise elder. The developers said they wanted to portray curiosity instead of authority. Elm's lab was made small and cluttered, filled with books and equipment, representing a researcher still learning. His relationship with the player mirrored mentorship rather than leadership. In contrast, Kanto's professor represented legacy, the bridge between generations. Together, they symbolized knowledge evolving over time. The decision to make the rival in Johto morally ambiguous was deliberate. The writers wanted to explore the idea of redemption rather than defeat. His theft of a starter Pokémon was written as an act of desperation, not evil. Through the story, he learns empathy, reflecting the region's theme of growth through forgiveness. His character arc marked a turning point for the series, introducing emotional depth rarely seen in early handheld games. Crystal introduced the ability to play as a female protagonist for the first time. Her design was based on late 90s Japanese fashion, a sporty outfit, rolled sleeves, and a confident posture. The team said they wanted her to look adventurous, not delicate. She was created to embody independence, not rebellion. The name Chris was chosen because it sounded bright in both English and Japanese, symbolizing clarity. The inclusion of choice quietly shifted the franchise's identity, forever a small step that made countless players feel seen. The roaming legendary mechanic used in Johto was groundbreaking. The programmers designed a unique memory system that tracked the creature's positions on the map even when players turned the console off. This gave them a sense of presence, as if they truly existed somewhere in the world, moving independently. The algorithm that determined their movement patterns was based on probability, weighted by distance, meaning the creatures were more likely to appear near where you last saw them, mimicking real migration. It was one of the first times a handheld game simulated living behavior beyond the player's control. Johto's battle backgrounds were designed to represent natural settings rather than abstract arenas. The fields, caves, and lakes shown behind Pokemon were drawn pixel by pixel to reflect the route's environment. The artist said they wanted battles to feel like part of the journey, not separate from it. This attention to atmosphere would later influence every generation afterward. Many players never noticed that the sprites of Pokemon slightly change color under different lighting conditions in gold and silver. The Game Boy Color could display more shades than its predecessor, and the developers used that ability to tint colors by time of day. A creature caught at dusk might appear slightly warmer, one caught at night slightly cooler. This subtle feature gave the world a living texture even when the screen was no bigger than a palm. The internal save data of Johto holds one more hidden value that isn't used by the game: kindness. It was an unused variable intended to measure how often players healed their Pokemon or used items to help them recover. Though it was never implemented, the name remained in the code, a ghost of an idea that the game could notice gentleness. And somewhere between the temples, forests, and quiet towns of Johto, that kindness still lingers. A place built not to challenge the player, but to teach them patience. A world where even time itself moves softly not to test, but to remember. Johto's mythology is built like a spiral, not a line, the story's loop, returning to the same truths through different symbols, towers that mirror each other, rivers that flow in circles, legends that never quite end. The writers said that Johto was designed to feel like a world caught between myth and memory, a place where history doesn't pass, but hums quietly in the background. Every ruin, every shrine, and every soft bell tone is a reminder that something sacred still lives beneath the soil. The bell tower's architecture was based on a real-world temple known for its ability to resonate sound through wooden pillars. The designers visited it to study how vibrations moved through the structure. In the game's files, the tower's tile set is labeled Heartwood, a name chosen to symbolize the living core of tradition. The floorboards in the upper levels use alternating shades to mimic moonlight filtering through roof gaps, while the golden tiles of the summit were drawn to resemble polished brass bells viewed at dusk. Every detail was meant to feel sacred, not intimidating, but reverent. The burned tower's ruins were created from those same tiles, recolored and damaged by hand, not automatically. The artist who designed them said that destruction should feel personal. Each beam and floor tile was darkened manually, pixel by pixel, with care. The flames that once consumed it were not shown but remembered, and that restraint made the story stronger. The tower's music uses the same melody as the bell tower, but slowed by half and transposed into minor key, as if the song itself had aged. The ruins of Alph are more than puzzles. They are a language experiment, disguised as archaeology. The symbols that appear on the walls were designed to resemble Latin script, but distorted by the absence of straight lines, creating a feeling of ancient imperfection. The Unknown alphabet, when decoded, forms phrases that are deliberately poetic words about life, dreams, and eternity. In development notes, these were described as messages to future players. The idea was that discovery should feel like communication across time. The arrangement of the unknown rooms forms the shape of an eye when viewed from above, a subtle nod to the idea of unseen knowledge always watching. The puzzles inside the ruins were inspired by tangrams and sliding blocks found in old handheld puzzle toys. The designers wanted something tactile, something that made the player slow down. In an early interview, one developer said that the ruins of Alph were not meant to reward progress, but patience. Solving them was secondary, feeling their rhythm was the real goal. When completed, the game plays a faint echo of the unknown cry layered behind the puzzle sound, a soft acknowledgement, as if the ruins themselves whisper thank you. Johto's myths drew heavily from Shinto and Buddhist ideas of cycles and balance. The region's legendary guardians, one of the sea and one of the sky, represented two halves of spiritual harmony. One guarded the undercurrent of emotion, the other the clarity of thought. The beasts that were reborn beneath them symbolized humanity's relationship with the divine, reckless destruction followed by forgiveness. The act of revival, performed by a force unseen, reflected an ancient theme that even tragedy can become sacred when remembered with compassion. Ecruteak City's name comes from the blending of ecru, the French word for nut or bolt, and teak, a sacred wood used in temples. Together, they mean bound by wood, a symbolic phrase suggesting unity through structure. Many of Johto's town names follow this pattern, mixing materials and emotions: violet for humility, olivine for endurance, Xianwood for calm, goldenrod for abundance. The designers said they wanted every name to carry a moral quality, like virtues disguised as geography. Breeding, one of Johto's defining features, was designed as both a mechanic and a metaphor. The idea came from observing players in Kanto repeatedly catching Pokémon to perfect stats. Instead of turning that into a grind, the developers transformed it into growth. The daycare pair system was modeled after the Japanese concept of tanomu, or mutual trust. When two creatures are left behind, the game tracks their compatibility through invisible friendship values that increase with time. Even the hatching step count is a symbolic number chosen to correspond roughly with the number of heartbeats per minute in a resting human. This detail gave the cycle of new life a real rhythm, one the player could feel through movement. The first egg in the series, given to players as a gift, was intentionally coded to hatch after a short number of steps, roughly the length of a walk between two towns. This was designed to create attachment. The developers wanted the player to experience curiosity, care, and reward in one continuous motion. The soft animation of the egg, shaking 3 times before opening, was chosen to evoke anticipation without tension, the same way the Pokeball pulses before a capture. Johto's Pokegear radio feature contained unused broadcast data. In the code, there are 2 unassigned frequencies labeled Earth and Star. They produce static if accessed through debugging, but each one plays faint, distorted notes similar to the background hum of the ruins of Alph. Some fans later theorized that they were remnants of an abandoned idea, a hidden transmission linking the ruins to a cosmic origin. Though unconfirmed, the developers admitted that they once considered connecting the unknown to outer space, describing them as letters of the universe. The developers used the color gold in the interface not only for aesthetic reasons, but for emotional warmth. On the Game Boy Color, gold's hue appears softer, almost brown, resembling the color of morning sunlight. This was meant to represent optimism and continuity. Silver, by contrast, appeared cool and reflective, symbolizing thought and melancholy. When both versions were played side by side, the designers said the screens looked like sunrise and moonlight, 2 versions of the same world seen from different times of day. The internal code for Johto's save data contains an unused line labeled Heavenly Light. It was tied to the lighthouse event in Olivine, meant to trigger an ambient glow effect around the top of the tower that was later cut for technical reasons. The effect was eventually realized in the Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes, where the light finally shines visibly from the tower's peak. The artist said this was a promise fulfilled. 10 years later, the Safari Zone in Johto was replaced by the bug catching contest, not due to budget but philosophy. The team believed the contest better reflected Johto's peaceful tone, a world less about capture and more about observation. The park ball used in the contest has a catch rate higher than any regular Pokeball, but its success animation was deliberately muted. The designers said it was meant to feel like appreciation rather than conquest. Johto's map layout hides small patterns that connect its towns in symbolic ways. Violet, Azalea, and Goldenrod form a triangle representing learning, nature, and civilization, the three aspects of growth. Ecrutiac, Olivine, and Cyanwood form another triangle representing faith, endurance, and reflection. The two triangles overlap near Mount Mortar, forming a six-pointed shape resembling a lotus, a symbol of enlightenment and rebirth. This geometric harmony guided placement decisions more than realism ever did. The wild Pokemon encounter music in Johto begins with a faint echo of the Kanto battle intro, slowed down to half tempo and played in a minor key. This subtle reuse of melody was intentional, representing the continuation of legacy. The team said they wanted battles in Johto to feel familiar yet matured, like returning to childhood places that now seem smaller. That balance between nostalgia and newness became the emotional blueprint for future generations. The mystery gift system introduced in Gold and Silver was inspired by early wireless communication experiments in Japan. Using infrared sensors in the cartridges, players could exchange data simply by pointing consoles at each other. The developers described it as two lights touching. The small blinking LEDs on the Game Boy Color were used to represent connection, and Masuda later said that this mechanic was designed to make players feel like friendship has weight. One of the rarest glitches in Johto allows an invisible trainer to appear near the battle tower if save data is corrupted. This trainer has no name and no dialogue, only a single move registered patience. The entry cannot be battled, only spoken to, and it says nothing before vanishing. Many players dismissed it as coincidence, but some believed it was a debugging leftover tied to a stress test of the friendship mechanic. Whatever its origin, it became a ghost story whispered among fans, proof that even data in Johto carries emotion. And like every story told in that land of old temples and soft rain, the details fade into something gentler. A quiet world still pulsing beneath the code of bells that never stop ringing, of ruins that still whisper, and of words written by unseen hands, reminding anyone who listens that patience, faith, and kindness are the true treasures of time. Johto's geography was inspired by the Kansai region of Japan, the historical heartland of culture, temples, and tradition. The map's western mountains echo the terrain between Kyoto and Nara, while its eastern plains draw from Shiga Prefecture and the shores of Lake Biwa. That lake, vast and still, became the model for Johto's central body of water, a place where reflection, both literal and emotional, defines the world's rhythm. The designers said the shape of Johto was a heart leaning to the left, drawn with the intention that movement always curves inward, toward memory. Ecrutiac was modeled after Kyoto's old districts. The tiled roofs, narrow streets, and subdued palette were deliberate evocations of that city's quiet beauty. Even the bells in its tower were tuned to match the frequency of real temple chimes recorded on site. Violet City, by contrast, was inspired by old academic towns like Nara, where stone paths lead to wooden lecture halls surrounded by trees. The combination of study and spirituality gave Johto its atmosphere knowledge that hums rather than speaks. Goldenrod City's layout was drawn from Osaka's architecture, particularly its central station and shopping arcades. The game corner and radio tower reflect the era's fascination with technology and commerce. Yet beneath the city's modern tone lies a hint of melancholy. The underground tunnel, dimly lit and lined with merchants, was based on a real Osaka passageway the artists walked through late at night. They described it as a place where the world felt asleep but alive. Cianwood's isolation across the sea was an intentional design choice meant to break the player's routine. It was modeled after Awaji Island, a quiet coastal area known for cliffs and shrines facing the ocean. The developers wanted the player's journey across the waves to feel cleansing, as if leaving behind the noise of the mainland. The soft gray of its stone and the sound of the surf were meant to evoke introspection. Azalea's design came from Japanese forestry towns where traditional crafts are still practiced. The slowpoke well represents the old relationship between humans and nature, a coexistence sometimes forgotten, then remembered. The well itself was drawn using circular brick tiles, each shaded individually to appear aged by time. The script in the design notes simply reads, "Respect the roots." Mount Mortar and the surrounding caves were inspired by the mountain paths around Mount Hiei. The winding tunnels were made to feel like pilgrimage routes, where travel was both physical and spiritual. The internal tile name for these areas, Silence, reflects their purpose, not challenge, but contemplation. When designing the caves, developers adjusted the encounter rates so players would spend more time walking in peace than fighting. The designers once said that Johto's routes were built like haiku, short, simple, and filled with space. Each stretch of land was given a single emotional keyword: morning, distance, breath, return. Those words never appeared in-game, but guided composition. The result was a world that feels reflective without ever slowing completely. The wind sounds added in the remakes were recorded from the hills near Mount Yoshino, capturing the sound of real spring air. Even the Pokemon designs of Johto draw from its cultural identity. Many were inspired by traditional art motifs, fox spirits, paper lanterns, and guardian dogs found at shrines. Some were based on regional animals unique to central Japan, such as deer and badgers, reflecting the developers' fascination with local wildlife. They wanted Johto's species to feel organic, born from its soil rather than designed in a lab. This made the region feel ancient, a place where the natural and mystical intertwine. The idea of reincarnation runs through Johto's narrative. The trio of beasts represents souls reborn, the towers represent faith restored, and even ordinary gameplay loops, from hatching eggs to replanting berries, echo that rhythm. The writing team said they wanted the player to feel that nothing is ever truly lost, only changed. The theme of renewal was so strong that it shaped the music. Every major town theme uses a rising note pattern that mirrors the idea of ascent after decline. The Lake of Rage was originally meant to appear earlier in the story, but it was moved deeper into the journey to symbolize emotional climax. The color red reflected anger, yes, but also transformation passion turned dangerous. When the shimmering creature emerges from the water, the moment feels both violent and holy. It's not a random encounter, it's a reflection of the world's energy turned visible. The sound design of the rain and wind in that area was built from real field recordings mixed with synthetic reverb, creating the impression of an infinite storm caught inside a handheld screen. Blackthorn City's design draws from old mountain villages where draconic symbolism is common. The Dragon's Den was based on caves near Mount Ibuki, where legends speak of serpents guarding sacred springs. The water inside the den glows faintly blue because the artist tinted the tiles to suggest bioluminescence, a symbol of life, thriving even in darkness. The gym's shape, circular rather than rectangular, was meant to evoke both a dojo and a ritual hall. Cherry Grove City was the first town drawn after the player's home. Its name and design were inspired by the fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms. The developers said that this town was meant to remind players that the journey begins with impermanence, a theme that carries through the region's storytelling. Even its music loops slightly shorter than other towns, symbolizing brevity and transience. The Johto Pokemon League sits at the edge of both regions, not because of geography, but philosophy. The developers wanted victory to feel like returning to unity, where the borders between old and new dissolve. The mountain itself, sitting between Kanto and Johto, was drawn as a spiritual midpoint, a literal meeting of generations. The air at the summit was meant to feel still, not triumphant. They described it as a silence made of light. The remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, honored these ideas through color and sound. The remake's Morning Light uses warm filters over the pixel layers, giving the impression of haze. The fluttering of wings in the background audio was new, a small, almost imperceptible reminder of continuity. When the player revisits Kanto in the remakes, the sound of Johto's wind can still be heard faintly under Kanto's music, a hidden connection between past and present. The Pokeathlon Dome was built into the remakes as a reflection of balance between strength and grace. Its minigames were designed around rhythm and timing rather than aggression, capturing the region's sense of harmony. Even the gold medals were intentionally designed to match the shape of a lotus petal. The programmers said the dome represented competition, purified into play. The Safari Zone's redesign in the remakes brought it to Xianwood's outskirts, symbolizing nature, reclaiming what humans once controlled. The landscape shifts between areas like meadows, mountains, and wetlands, each designed around natural gradients of green and brown, inspired by real Japanese biomes. The developers said they wanted players to walk through a living painting. Johto's architecture uses more wooden and stone textures than any other region in the series. This was a conscious decision to distance it from the steel and glass aesthetics that would define later generations. The art team described Johto as a whisper of history, a place where every wall remembers its builder. The warm colors and soft outlines create the sense that even the buildings are alive, breathing with time. Many players never noticed that Johto's map subtly forms the kanji for soul. It was drawn that way intentionally. When rotated slightly, the shape of its mountains and routes resembles the character's flowing lines. This hidden signature ties into the region's spiritual focus, a world built not just for exploration, but reflection. Even the save screen background, featuring gentle golden light rays, was meant to evoke morning through paper screens. The artist said that when you saved in Johto, it should feel like closing a shoji door, a quiet act of peace, not finality. The developers believed that serenity was the truest sign of progress. The remake's use of walking companions, the small feature that lets your lead Pokemon follow behind you, was inspired by an old sketch from the original Johto design documents. In it, the player and a creature walk together through long grass with no enemies, only wind. That sketch was titled Harmony, and the remakes turned it into a living mechanic, closing a circle that began over a decade earlier. And when the remakes end, when the music fades into the same soft hum that started everything, the final save prompt appears against a pale horizon of gold. The developers called it the Quiet Sunrise, a moment meant to remind every player that endings in Johto are just mornings waiting to begin again. Many of Johto's creatures were drawn during a single summer when the art team moved into a smaller studio. They called it the Season of Silence. Without air conditioning, they worked beside open windows, sketching with cicadas droning outside. Those sounds later inspired the background ambience used on forest routes. The artist said that Johto's Pokemon were born in heat and hum. The small owl that greets you early in the journey was designed first, symbolizing awareness. Its circular body came from a woodblock print of an ink-brushed moon. The designer wanted its form to look balanced even when asleep, so both eyes close into perfect symmetry. That same sense of proportion carries through many Johto Pokemon's soft shapes, minimal edges, silhouettes meant to rest easily in memory. The fiery weasel starter was drawn to show motion in stillness. Each flame was meant to look as if it were exhaling. The team studied candlelight in glass jars to understand how fire breathes, then traced those rhythms onto its back. Its final evolution keeps the same rhythm, flames that bend forward, never backward, so even at rest it seems to be moving toward tomorrow. The gentle reptile that begins as a sprout was modeled after primitive dinosaurs found in children's science books. Its evolution line forms a quiet narrative seed, bloom, and canopy mirroring the life of a single tree. The pink petals were added last to soften the design. The lead artist said they symbolized a garden that learned to walk. A small blue creature that looks like a water mouse was the first Pokemon colored entirely with real-world reference hues. Its blue came from a Pantone swatch labeled Shallow River. The artist mixed white pixels into its outline to make it shimmer like sunlight on water, a technique reused years later for other aquatic designs. One of Johto's more mysterious Pokemon, the steel avian found near the Blackthorn Mountains, was created to represent the meeting of nature and technology. Its body is drawn with no organic curves. Every segment connects at precise angles of 45 or 90 degrees, yet its eyes are soft, almost kind. The designers said they wanted it to look manufactured by nature itself. Its typing, steel, and flying was chosen after the design was finished, not before. The gentle pink egg Pokemon introduced in Johto was originally meant to evolve through happiness measured by the time of day. If cared for during daylight, it would grow faster. If ignored, it would stay unchanged. Technical limits prevented that mechanic, but the code variable remains, labeled affection, day. Later generations would turn that forgotten idea into the full friendship system. The legendary dog-like creatures share a common design language: long limbs, flowing manes, and eyes drawn with single pixels of light to suggest tears. Each carries a hidden pattern: raindrops, lightning bolts, and flame marks within their sprite shading. They were built to embody motion, which is why their tails never fully align to the grid. Their sense of distance was a deliberate illusion. Every step they take seems faster than yours, because their speed frames use fewer transition sprites. The Guardian of the Seas was inspired by a Shinto concept called Nagare, meaning the flow of purity. Its wings were designed after folded origami paper cranes, representing prayers for safety. The opposite Guardian, born of sky and rainbow, was drawn from the Ho, the phoenix of fortune. The artists painted its feathers with every major hue used in the Game Boy Color palette, creating a living spectrum that symbolized rebirth through light. The small steel fairy that hides in forests was created to contrast the grandness of legends. It was designed to look ancient, yet childlike, with a body made of bronze and a heart that hums like machinery. Its cry was built from a slowed-down music box sample, giving it a tone halfway between clockwork and lullaby. Johto's insect Pokémon reflect the cycle of metamorphosis more directly than any other regions. From the early cocoon forms to the later moths and beetles, every design includes visible stages of change. The team studied pupae under magnifying lenses to capture the shapes of transformation. They wanted players to sense that patience brings beauty. The psychic Pokémon, known for its mirrored twins, was inspired by the idea of balance in dual minds. Its body outline forms a closed loop when traced, symbolizing introspection. The opposite eyes of its evolutions, one open, one closed, represent the coexistence of calm and chaos. Even its animation timing alternates slightly offbeat to make battles feel dreamlike. The tiny dog Pokémon that evolves through friendship was created as a metaphor for loyalty unmeasured by power. Its base stats were intentionally low, a design philosophy that said affection outweighs strength. The sprite's tail wags more frames than any other idle animation of its era. When programmers joked that it was too happy, the art team refused to shorten the loop. Johto's plant Pokémon often blend natural motifs with domestic imagery. The sunflower species mirrors the theme of light and growth, appearing more vivid during the day because its palette table references the internal clock. Its smiling expression was hand-drawn by a new artist who joined midway through development. She said she wanted to draw something that feels like summer never ends. The small ghost that resembles a lantern flame was designed around the concept of gentle fear. The developers believed that ghosts in Johto should evoke melancholy rather than terror. Its eyes are half closed, not from sleepiness, but from compassion, as if it watches over travelers who lose their way. Its Pokédex entry mentions warmth instead of cold, a deliberate inversion of horror. Even the common Pokémon of Johto hold secrets in their sprites. The rodent species that appear early on were mirrored horizontally between gold and silver versions, so that left-handed players would feel symmetry when playing on mirrored screens. The birdline that roosts near Violet City contains tiny pixel adjustments between day and night palettes. Its feathers gain one extra shade at dusk to simulate reflected sunset. The baby forms introduced in Johto were a direct result of the breeding mechanic. The team wanted to show continuity, that species could have origins beyond discovery. Each baby form was drawn to exaggerate the emotion of its adult counterpart. Bigger eyes for joy, rounder shapes for safety. One artist said that baby Pokémon are the memory of kindness made visible. Johto's mythology even hides inside its Pokédex numbering. The regional Pokédex for Gold and Silver contains exactly 100 creatures before returning to Kanto species, symbolizing completion. The number 100 was chosen because it mirrors the number of prayer beads on a Buddhist rosary. This was no coincidence. The lead writer described Johto as a circle of reflection, counted bead by bead. The design of the armored bug that can learn sword-like moves came from the samurai helmets of the Sengoku era. The artist studied antique headgear to capture the curve of polished iron and the pride in posture. Its color palette mixes crimson and black to represent both elegance and aggression. Every spike on its shell is drawn at a slightly different angle, giving the illusion that light shifts as it moves. The small bat that evolves into a larger form was given elongated wings in Johto to emphasize freedom. Its final evolution was created to symbolize companionship, speed balanced by trust. Its smiling mouth, added late in design, represents joy found in persistence. Even something once irritating becomes graceful with time. The dragon family of Blackthorn was designed as Johto's spiritual link to Kanto's own dragon line. The developers said they wanted continuity between myths, as if these creatures were descendants of older legends. The final form's elegant horns were drawn to echo river currents rather than aggression. Its wings are shaped not for flight realism, but for symbolism, a closed infinity loop representing eternity. The region's mischievous ghost was created by a developer known for his humor. He described it as a spirit that hides behind laughter. Its grin was designed pixel by pixel to flicker like candlelight, using alternating brightness frames. The English localization team debated removing its darker Pokédex lines, but ultimately kept them, believing the mixture of mischief and eeriness was core to Johto's tone. The water-ground creature, found in swamps, was originally drawn as a side project for a nature exhibit the studio planned. Its muddy skin and wide smile were meant to show adaptation and contentment. When added to the game, its relaxed demeanor contrasted perfectly with the harsher designs of Kanto's predators. Players often describe it as a Pokémon that feels like home. Johto's legendaries were built to connect heaven and earth, but its ordinary Pokémon were built to connect player and world. Every gentle color, every softened edge, every cry tuned for comfort, each one designed to make the region feel alive, but peaceful. Even decades later, their simplicity carries warmth, a reminder that sometimes the quietest creatures are the ones that last the longest in memory. Deep in the development files for Gold and Silver, there exists a set of unused maps simply titled Silent Hills. They are small, square test zones, each containing a single tree, a rock, or a signpost with no text. These maps were likely created to test collision mechanics, yet developers later said they used them to clear their heads between debugging sessions. The name Silent Hills wasn't a reference to another game, it was a metaphor for peace. One artist said, "We just needed quiet places for our thoughts to stand." In early prototypes, the Pokégear was originally going to have a dream option in its menu. The idea was to let players record short diary notes at Pokémon centers that would appear later as memories during rest scenes. The feature proved too complex for the Game Boy Color's memory limits, but the variable names Dream, Flag, and Memory Index remain in the code. Years later, a similar idea would return as the Dream World mechanic in later generations, closing a circle that began here. Unused sprites show that the Pokédex once had an alternate mode called Field View, displaying Pokémon as miniature silhouettes moving across tiny landscapes. These sprites included fields, caves, and waves, all built from only a handful of pixels. The function was meant to make the Pokédex feel alive, as though the creatures inside were still exploring their habitats. But when cartridge space ran short, the feature was cut. The artist described losing it as burying a garden before it could bloom. Gold and Silver also hide fragments of unused dialogue in their data, many written in simple phrases like, "The wind feels kind today," and "Do not forget to rest." These lines were not tied to any character. They were placeholders for an abandoned NPC called the Listener. The Listener was meant to appear randomly on routes, offering words of encouragement. When debugging caused placement issues, the team removed it, but they left the text behind gentle reminders, waiting quietly in the code. The internal naming convention for Johto's cities contains emotional markers. Goldenrod is labeled Town, Kind, Violet is Town, Wise, and Ekrutik is Town, More. These aren't used anywhere in gameplay, but they show the tone the writers wanted each place to hold. When questioned years later, the team said those tags were like tiny prayers typed in code. An early design document for the Johto Pokédex lists over 20 species that were ultimately cut. Some later returned in different forms, while others remain unseen. Among them was a small deer Pokemon named Honusu, a fusion of flame and deer. It had glowing antlers and was meant to live in the burned forests north of Ekrutik. The sketch still exists in an art book, faded and gentle, a ghost of a creature that never woke. The Johto games also contained placeholder icons for weather, though weather itself was not introduced until the next generation. These icons, small suns, moons, and clouds, were hidden deep in the graphic data, labeled simply Test Sky. Developers later confirmed they had planned a primitive weather system where morning dew, rain, and fog would subtly alter battle accuracy. The concept was shelved due to memory limits, but fragments of the code remained, later inspiring the full weather mechanics of the Hoenn region. Inside the sound files of Gold and Silver lies an unused track titled Beyond the Tower. It's a slow, looping tune built from bells and faint wind chimes. The composer, Junichi Masuda, confirmed it was intended for a third tower in Ekrutiak, representing balance through silence. Though the map was never built, the melody still lingers, a ghost song without a home. Some fans later layered it over the burned tower's music, and the harmony fits perfectly, as though the towers were always meant to sing together. Several of Johto's sprites show signs of being drawn by hand with mouse input rather than tablet stylus. Small tremors in the lines give a human touch that newer pixel art often lacks. One artist said he preferred those imperfections because they make the creatures breathe. You can see it most clearly in the eyes of the baby Pokemon, slight misalignments that look like real blinking. Early screenshots from the 1997 Space World demo of Gold and Silver show a vastly different Johto. Towns were arranged vertically rather than horizontally, and the route names were replaced with kanji representing path, forest, and home. The color scheme was more muted sepia tones and gray-green skies. When the design shifted toward the brighter palette we know, developers said it was to capture the feeling of nostalgia under sunlight. One of the strangest secrets of Johto lies in its clock system. The in-game time advances even when the console is off, thanks to a small internal battery, but buried in the code is a secondary value called Dream Time. It tracks play sessions that last longer than 1 hour and adjusts the internal lighting slightly warmer afterward. The programmers added this because they noticed long play sessions often happened at night. They wanted the screen to feel softer on tired eyes. Few players ever noticed, but it's there, a silent kindness from developer to dreamer. The remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, contain nods to these old secrets. In one of the game's data tables, an unused map slot is labeled Mem Room. It loads a blank space filled with soft golden light and one invisible tile marked Listener. Data miners who discovered it called it the Room of Memory, likely a tribute to that removed NPC from the original games. Nothing happens inside it, but the music there matches the key of the burned tower, looping infinitely. The development tools used for Johto's sprites had a built-in palette randomizer that artists nicknamed the Dream Wheel. By spinning through colors, they could discover combinations impossible to plan consciously. The steel bird's silver tone and the golden hue of the phoenix were both chosen this way, happy accidents that defined legends. The team often described this process as letting the machine dream with us. Johto's coding documents reveal that many Pokemon share identical height or weight data with others, but not by accident. The developers intentionally mirrored numbers between species that were spiritually linked. The butterfly Pokemon shares its weight with a cocoon species, symbolizing transformation. The fox line matches its counterpart from Kanto, representing continuity. Even the mighty guardian weighs the same as a smaller, common bird, a deliberate statement that greatness is not size, but meaning. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the Pokewalker accessory contained several hidden routes that could only be unlocked through specific infrared patterns exchanged between devices. These patterns were never officially documented. Players who discovered them found locations with poetic names like Edge of Night and Quiet Garden, each containing unusual encounter tables. Some included rare Johto species appearing outside their usual habitats, symbolizing freedom beyond borders. The developers later admitted these hidden routes were personal gifts to curious fans' rewards for those who keep walking. One of the most heartfelt secrets in Johto's development came from a programmer who embedded his initials inside a line of binary code used for the game's save confirmation. The letters are invisible to the player, but still load each time the message, "Would you like to save your progress?" appears. When asked why, he said, "So that when someone saves, I know I helped them rest." Even the way Johto saves data carries meaning. The confirmation chime is a single tone slightly higher than Kanto's, chosen to sound like morning birdsong rather than static. The sound designer said it represents the moment between wakefulness and dream. That small note, less than half a second long, became one of the most recognizable yet unnoticed pieces of audio in the series. And within that sound, within the data, and within the old maps no one visits anymore, Johto continues to hum a world that never stops remembering. It holds the stories that never made it to daylight, the whispers of developers who built hope into binary, and the kindness of creators who wanted every player, no matter how small the screen, to feel seen. Johto never truly ended when the credits rolled. Its ideas drifted forward, invisible yet constant, shaping everything that came after. Developers often called it the soul of Pokemon, the region that taught them what the series could feel like. Its lessons were not in power or scale, but in rhythm, the way a world breathes when left to its own pace. Hoenn, Sinnoh, and the regions that followed all carry traces of Johto's quiet design language, woven like thread through decades of games. When Hoenn was created, many of its core mechanics came directly from experiments made during Johto's development. The weather system, the cycling paths, and the emphasis on environment were all evolutions of features cut from gold and silver. Developers even referred to Hoenn as Johto's dream fulfilled. The reflective water tiles, drawn with alternating wave patterns, were first tested in the Lake of Rage before being perfected for Hoenn's endless seas. The result was a region that felt alive, not because of what moved, but because of what waited. Sinnoh's myths also bear Johto's spiritual fingerprints. Its focus on creation, time, and emotion grew from the Twin Towers and their lessons about humility. The writers said that Sinnoh's legendaries, the beings of willpower, emotion, and knowledge, were written as distant descendants of Johto's philosophy. In both regions, truth comes not from conquest, but from coexistence. The structure of Sinnoh's temples and lakes mirrors Johto's geography, forming another triad of balance. It is as if the world's history loops gently back to its origins, whispering the same teachings through different lands. Even the design of later Pokédex entries reflects Johto's voice. After Gold and Silver, every new generation included at least one entry written with a tone of reflection, describing not just what a creature does, but what it feels. That shift in language began in Johto, where the Pokédex became less encyclopedia and more poem. The writers who joined in later generations said that their favorite part of the job was writing feelings that pretend to be facts. The region's philosophy of duality continued in every paired version after. Fire and Leaf, Ruby and Sapphire, Diamond and Pearl all follow Johto's symbolic structure of opposing forces balanced by compassion. The teams behind later games often mentioned Gold and Silver in interviews, calling them the bridge between technology and nature, story and silence. They believed that once the concept of harmony had been coded into the series, it could never truly fade. Johto's return through Heart Gold and Soul Silver was more than a remake, it was a meditation. The developers said they approached it as a conversation with their younger selves. They reused many of the original tiles, not because they had to, but because they wanted the world to feel familiar in its imperfections. The remakes carry small, invisible connections to the originals, exact coordinate matches where old events occurred. For example, the spot where the red Gyarados appears shares identical map coordinates between both generations. It was a deliberate echo, a way of letting 2 decades touch through data. The inclusion of the walking companion feature in the remakes sparked what the team called the empathy engine. Players spoke of feeling closer to their Pokémon than ever before. That sense of closeness was exactly what Johto had always tried to teach. One developer said, "It is the most Johto thing we could ever add, a world where love follows you." The same concept inspired features in later regions, from camping to picnics, each designed to blur the line between training and companionship. In the Nova region, the morality of its story, questioning the relationship between humans and Pokémon, directly reflects Johto's moral arc of redemption. The rival's evolution from thief to friend in Johto became the template for complex character growth in later stories. Writers have said that Nova's ideological conflicts were Johto's forgiveness, retold through louder voices. Kalos, with its emphasis on beauty, fashion, and history, was shaped by Johto's attention to culture. The architectural detail, the reflective storytelling, and the appreciation for age all trace back to Johto's aesthetic. Kalos's use of warm filters and soft orchestration was described internally as Johto through stained glass. In Alola, the day and night cycle returned, this time tied directly to real-world time zones. That innovation began in Johto, where the passage of time first mattered. The idea that morning and evening should change the feeling of play was one of the most quietly revolutionary choices in game design. Alola's dual versions, one running 12 hours apart, were literal continuations of Johto's clock, reminding players that time itself can be part of a world's soul. Galar's wild area, with its open terrain and rotating weather, exists because Johto once dreamed of dynamic skies it could not yet code. Developers acknowledge this connection, saying that Johto's limitations taught them patience, that sometimes a good idea must wait for the right decade. When the skies finally began to move and rain to fall, Johto's reflection appeared in every ripple. Even Paldea's world building, centered on legacy, research, and unity, borrows from Johto's foundation. Its ancient ruins and academies echo the same reverence for learning and history. The inclusion of professors named for time Sada and Turo mirrors Johto's core themes of past and present, gold and silver, day and night. The pattern is unmistakable. Johto's balance lives on in every region that follows. Outside of the main games, Johto's spirit flows through spin-offs and adaptations as well. The early Pokemon anime arcs that take place there were directed with slower pacing, softer music, and wider frames. Scenes lingered longer on sunsets and quiet towns. The art director said, "Those choices came from a belief that Johto isn't a region, it's a feeling. That feeling of calm continuation would define Pokemon's tone for years to come." The music of Johto became a kind of inheritance for future composers. Its melodies were written in pentatonic scales, chosen for emotional openness. Later games borrowed those same patterns subconsciously. The composer for Sinnoh once said that every new Pokemon soundtrack contains at least one Johto chord, a tonal structure that instantly evokes nostalgia. Even the modern orchestral themes in recent entries carry the faint echo of Ecrutake's bells in their harmonics. Johto's legacy also reshaped how fans interacted with the games. The introduction of breeding led to entire communities of caretakers, players who saw themselves not as competitors, but as nurturers. That gentle perspective transformed Pokemon's culture, emphasizing patience and kindness over strength. Many fans today still say that Johto taught them empathy through gameplay, a rare thing for any video game to achieve. In interviews, Masuda often described gold and silver as the region of second chances. That phrase became a mantra inside Game Freak for years. It inspired mechanics like rematches, time-based events, and the ability to revisit older regions. The philosophy was simple. Progress doesn't erase the past, it harmonizes with it. Every time a player returns to an old route and finds something new, that moment is Johto speaking. The Pokewalker, the small pedometer device that linked with Heart Gold and Soul Silver, remains one of the purest expressions of Johto's heart. It turned walking into play, reinforcing the bond between motion and mindfulness. The designers said it was meant to remind players that Pokemon was not just about screens, but about moving through the real world gently. Each step became a small prayer for presence, echoing the region's lessons about patience and care. Even outside gaming, Johto continues to inspire. Artists, musicians, and writers often reference its imagery: bells, towers, rain, gold light. These symbols have become universal shorthand for peace and nostalgia. The reason they endure is simple. Johto was never about victory, it was about balance. It invited players to listen rather than chase, to explore rather than conquer. When developers from newer generations reflect on their careers, they often mention Johto as the place where they learned restraint. One designer said, "We realized a game doesn't have to shout to be unforgettable." That principle now guides the pacing of modern titles. Even outside Pokemon, the idea that quiet can be powerful, that stillness can be play. The cycle of day and night that began in Johto has outlived every console generation. Even today, when technology can simulate entire planets, the simple fade from gold to blue remains one of gaming's most comforting transitions. It is more than lighting, it is memory encoded in time. Every time the sun sets in a Pokemon game, somewhere in its data, Johto exhales. And as players continue to wander through new regions, catching new forms and hearing new songs, the spirit of that old world lingers. The sound of bells under pixelated skies, the shimmer of a lake reflecting sunset, the feeling of saving before sleep, all of it leads back to Johto, the place where Pokemon found its calm, where every generation still begins again in silence, before dawn, when the world is golden and the air smells like rain. When you think back to Johto, it never feels far away. The moment you remember its forests or hear a few notes of its music, the world around you softens and time folds in on itself. It is the rare kind of place that exists both in the cartridge and in the heart, a land that remembers you even when you forget it. Every town, every bell, every lake quietly holds the memory of someone who once walked there. That is what makes Johto eternal, not its maps, but the people who keep dreaming of them. The first time players saw the sunrise shift over the pixelated horizon, something subtle changed in how games were felt. It was no longer about reaching an end. It was about existing inside a living moment. The morning light over New Bark Town, the glow on the path to Cherry Grove, the fading blue of evening near the ruins of Alf. These were not just backdrops, but moods. The world was teaching stillness, one quiet frame at a time. Every sound in Johto carries memory. The soft chime of entering a Pokemon Center was recorded to mimic the tone of a home doorbell, while the faint rustle of tall grass was designed to resemble a human exhale. The bicycle theme begins with a short pause, the space of a single heartbeat before speeding up, representing the feeling of breath before movement. Even the sound of saving the game was tuned to the frequency of calm meditation bells. These details were never explained because they were never meant to be noticed. They were meant to be felt. The region's design philosophy continues to resonate across generations of players. Those who began their journey there often describe a sense of calm they can't quite name, a comfort found not in victory, but in rhythm. Johto was the first Pokemon world that seemed to age with its audience. It wasn't trying to impress, it was trying to understand. Its simplicity was sincerity, its quiet a form of trust. When developers revisited Johto for its remakes, they found themselves moved by how much the old code still worked. The towers loaded perfectly, the routes connected smoothly, and the same emotional pulse lived in the smallest towns. They described the experience as opening a letter you wrote to yourself years ago. Every pixel carried the warmth of handmade art, every note a message from younger hearts to older ones. The world they built had outlasted its technology because it was made from feeling, not format. The name Johto itself translates roughly to castle tower in Japanese, but in development notes it's often paired with the phrase Kokoro no Furusato, home of the heart. That phrase explains everything. The region is less a location and more a return to safety. When players cross its borders, something about its air slows the mind. The forests hum low, the lakes shimmer faintly, and the towns seem to breathe. You can almost hear it when the wind passes through the sound of a world content with being. Many of the region's smallest secrets are invisible now, but still exist beneath the surface. The internal code values that measure affection, patience, and even weather all use similar naming conventions: heart, value, care, timer, peace, flag. Those phrases are quiet reminders that Johto was written by people who wanted kindness to live in the machine. They turned empathy into math, and somehow it worked. Johto's stories never end because they were written in circles. Every legend, every encounter, every melody returns to itself. The phoenix rises, the rain cleanses, the towers rebuild, the people move forward, but the feeling stays. This loop mirrors the act of playing itself, beginning again, not because you must, but because you want to. Restarting a save in Johto doesn't feel like loss. It feels like coming home. The sense of rebirth runs deeper than any storyline. It's in the way the grass sways at dawn, in the flicker of a campfire sprite, in the gentle steps between one town and the next. The developers called this the hidden life, the quiet animation that gives the illusion that the world keeps moving even when you stop. If you stand long enough on a Johto route, you'll notice tiny patterns. Leaves drift slower at night, water ripples differently after a storm, and wild Pokemon hesitate for a frame before appearing, as if deciding whether to disturb your peace. Those details are the region's heartbeat. In many ways, Johto was a meditation on impermanence. It teaches that beauty lies in passing moments, a petal falling, a bell's echo fading, a sunset bleeding into dusk. The remakes amplified this theme by introducing reflective surfaces, puddles that mirror your sprite, glass towers that catch the sunday. These were designed to make you notice what you might normally ignore, the world watching itself, the fleeting reflection of you within it. When the time system cycles from night back to dawn, the game subtly resets its ambient noise. The silence just before birdsong returns is not empty, it's deliberate. The programmers called it breath space, a half second of stillness coded between two sound layers. They wanted the world to feel like it exhaled before morning began. It's one of the smallest, most unnoticed acts of artistry in gaming, a pause that gives the illusion of life. Johto also shaped how players relate to memory. The ability to revisit Kanto taught the idea that nostalgia itself could be playable. The act of returning, of seeing old places through wiser eyes, is one of gaming's most powerful emotional mechanics. That choice, to make the past part of the present, transformed Pokemon into a story not about exploration, but reflection. Every later remake, from Fire Red to Brilliant Diamond, owes that emotional blueprint to Johto's quiet courage to look backward. The theme of companionship that began there, of walking beside your Pokemon rather than commanding it, carried forward through decades. It influenced spin-offs like Pokemon Snap, Mystery Dungeon, and even non-Pokemon games made by former developers. The idea that empathy could be interactive became one of Johto's greatest legacies. The region whispered, "You are not alone," and the world listened. There's a reason so many players say Johto feels like a dream. It exists at the edge of clarity, where details blur into emotion. Its music never ends abruptly. It fades. Its skies shift slowly, never startling. Even its battles are framed by gentle colors. When you fall asleep after playing, the sound of its routes lingers like an afterimage, not excitement, but peace. It's a world designed to stay with you, quietly, long after the console powers down. Decades later, the game's internal batteries may die, but the memory remains. The golden screen, the gentle wind, the first step into grass that rustles like breath. The developers said they knew that one day the cartridges would fade, but that didn't bother them. They believed the true save file was the player's heart. That's why Johto's stories repeat, to make sure they are never forgotten. If you were to visit Johto again in thought, in dream, in imagination, you'd find it unchanged. The towers still stand, the bells still ring, and the ocean still breathes beneath the cliffs. Somewhere beyond the lake of rage, the water still ripples red. Somewhere in the burned tower, the wind still hums through charred beams. Somewhere at dawn, the same soft music still plays over Newbark Town. It waits patiently, as if time itself promised to keep it safe for you. And when you save your progress one last time, when the gentle chime plays and the screen fades to gold, you realize that Johto has been teaching you the same thing since the first moment you arrived, that progress isn't about moving forward, It's about finding peace where you stand, that endings are just mornings with softer light, that even when the cartridge sleeps, the memory keeps glowing. The towers, the wind, the song, they will always wait, because Johto was never just a region on a map. It was a feeling, a promise, a quiet heartbeat in the long history of Pokemon and in the hearts of those who wandered there. Long after the screen fades, it remains gentle, golden, eternal. Johto lives on in fragments that most players never see, the way a melody hides inside another, the way a shadow from one era stretches softly into the next. When Paldea's battle music begins, listen closely. Its faint temple chime is tuned to the same key as Ecruteak's bells. That choice was deliberate. The composer Masuda said that no matter how far Pokemon traveled, Johto's tone will always be the language of memory. In the code of modern games, many textures still bear the prefix JH, a shorthand left over from Johto Height Map. It's a quiet fingerprint of the past that new developers still use because those early file templates became tradition. The mountains in later regions literally rise from Johto's digital skeleton. The geometry that shaped its towers continues to hold up forests and caves across the entire franchise. Even the Pokeball animations owe a debt to Johto. The soft glint of light across the red cap, the one that appears just before a catch completes, was first introduced in gold and silver as an experimental hope sparkle. The effect was created with only 3 pixels, yet it made the animation feel alive. Every modern catch scene still includes it, preserved like a heartbeat. The reason the player's reflection appears in certain water surfaces after the Game Boy Color era is because Johto taught the artists that connection mattered. They wanted the world to notice you, to return your gaze. This feature was proposed by one of the youngest designers on the Johto team, who described it as a mirror to remind you that you exist inside the story. That same reflection later became a core visual in multiple remakes and cinematics. Johto's design also influenced how modern towns breathe. In later regions, NPCs follow daily schedules, walking home at night, pausing to admire sunsets, because Johto first experimented with living time. The memory of that feature inspired developers to fill cities with life that moved independently of the player. The first time you saw a shopkeeper lock a door or a fisherman pack up at dusk, you were watching Johto's time ripple outward. In Pokemon Home, when you scroll through your collection, some backgrounds include a soft golden haze. It's subtle, but those tones were modeled on Johto's palette. Designers confirmed that the gradient named GS, Sunset, was sampled directly from the skies of the original gold and silver titles. That same color hex is archived in multiple design documents labeled Emotion Base. It's a hue that has quietly tied generations together without most players knowing. Johto's influence even extends to Pokemon behavior. In later generations, sleeping animations were introduced, small breathing loops that cause a resting creature's chest to rise and fall. This detail began as a technical experiment in the remakes, when animators tried to make resting sprites pulse softly between frames. They called it the Johto rhythm, the sensation that the world was breathing with you. Every calm resting pose that followed traces back to that gentle idea. The Pokeathlon Dome from Heart Gold and Soul Silver became the foundation for modern minigames. Its physics engine, written from scratch for touch controls, was reused in contests, camp features, and even future spin-offs. The developers admitted that they hid several unused events like Vine, Swing, and Glider Race inside the data, meant for a sequel that never arrived. Yet those prototypes later inspired many outdoor mechanics, proving Johto's experiments never truly stopped evolving. If you stand still long enough on Route 47 in the remakes, the wind shifts direction every few seconds. This is not random. The code tracks the player's facing direction and alters the breeze to move opposite, as if the world itself breathes against you. The lead programmer said it was his farewell message, a reminder that nature notices. The same subtle system reappears in modern titles, now tied to particle effects like dust and snow. Even Pokemon names carry the region's fingerprint. Many Johto species have linguistic symmetry palindromes, mirrored syllables, or rhythm in repetition. Later localization teams continued this pattern subconsciously. Words like Rowlet, Zorua, and Tandemaeus all reflect that same quiet fascination with sound loops, echoing Johto's theme of duality. The rhythm of their names mirrors the rhythm of its world. In the original Japanese code for Johto, the internal variable for trainer happiness was labeled Kokoro, meaning heart. That variable still exists in modern Pokemon games. Even as systems evolved, the name was never changed. Developers treat it almost like sacred text, untouchable, too poetic to rename. Every time a friendship level rises, somewhere deep inside the code, Johto's heart beats once more. The Pokédex entries written in the years after Johto continue its tradition of emotional storytelling. You can see it in how they describe creatures' habits, gentle phrases like, loves the warmth of people, or waits quietly for the dawn. Before Johto, most Pokédex text focused on measurements or power. After Johto, they began speaking softly, like lullabies. The writers admitted that they often read Gold and Silver's entries before writing new ones, calling them the blueprint for kindness. Even Pokemon Go, decades later, keeps Johto's influence alive. When day turns to night, the ambient colors fade into gold instead of gray. That specific hue is based on Johto's evening palette. The choice was made intentionally to evoke calm rather than darkness. The region's spirit thrives, even in augmented reality, a sign that Johto never belonged to one medium. Collectors often notice a pattern in Johto's shiny variants. Many glimmer in soft tones, pastel blues, muted purples, or faded pinks, unlike the bright contrast seen in other regions. This was an artistic decision. The original color designer said, Johto was built in twilight, so its shines should feel like dusk. That single line explains why its palette feels so different. It was always meant to glow like the last light of day. And if you look at the game's end credits, the order of the staff names subtly mirrors the flight path of the Ho-Oh seen in the final cutscene. Each name scrolls in arcs that align with the bird's wings. The animation code uses sinusoidal motion curves labeled rainbow, left and rainbow, right. That elegant symmetry closes the story the same way it began, with grace written into structure. Johto's power was never about innovation alone. It was about care. Every future region that remembered how to breathe, how to rest, how to listen to silence, those were its children. And even as new mechanics come and go, Johto's spirit lingers like a melody under the surface, still humming, still gold. When you close your eyes, Johto never fades. It waits quietly, like the pause between one note and the next. It does not demand attention, it simply remains. The colors, the bells, the soft hum of its forests, all of it drifts somewhere beneath the surface of memory, glowing faintly like a lantern under still water. That is the true gift of the region, not that it changes you, but that it stays. Somewhere, a tower still burns, not in flame, but in time, The ashes rise slowly into morning air, and the sound of wings passes overhead. Somewhere, the silver guardian still circles the ocean, carving crescents of light in the waves. Somewhere, the boy in New Barktown still stands on the edge of adventure, his reflection trembling in the river, wondering how far the wind can carry him. These scenes exist outside of code now. They live inside the people who remember them. Developers often said that Johto was their most personal work because it was written during a time of uncertainty. They were balancing the past of Kanto with the promise of the future, unsure if their small series could last. And so they poured themselves into every pixel, turning their hopes into towns, their fatigue into rain, their dreams into legends. You can still feel it, that quiet sincerity humming through every root. It's the sound of people creating something they didn't know the world would love. Johto taught players that endings are gentle things. When you defeat the champion and the music softens, there is no grand explosion or fireworks. The screen fades to gold, the theme slows, and you are left alone with your thoughts. It is an ending designed to feel like rest, a lullaby rather than a triumph. The message is subtle but profound. Peace is victory. Even the way Johto loops back into Kanto was designed as a metaphor for life itself. You return to where you began, changed but familiar, stronger but quieter. The journey becomes a circle, every new discovery leading you closer to home. The idea that progress and nostalgia can coexist became one of Pokemon's deepest lessons, a truth that every generation after would carry forward. Over time, as players grew older and moved through their own lives, Johto aged with them. It became a memory shared across decades, the feeling of a cool morning breeze through pixelated trees, the sound of a slow bicycle tune echoing through headphones late at night. For some, it was the first world they ever explored alone. For others, it was the first world they ever returned to. It never asked to be remembered, but somehow it always was. In the years since, technology has transformed, screens have sharpened, and music has grown orchestral, yet none of that has replaced what Johto gave, the comfort of stillness. Its design reminds us that not everything must be fast, loud, or vast to be meaningful. Sometimes the most powerful worlds are the ones that simply breathe beside us, quietly saying, "You can rest here." The region's soft balance of day and night mirrors the human heart. Each sunrise a beginning, each sunset a reflection. You don't conquer Johto, you grow with it. Every time you save your game, every time you pause and let the music linger, the world grows a little warmer. That's the secret. The more you rest in it, the more alive it becomes. And somewhere within the game's invisible language, inside the numbers and code, there's a value that still rises and falls with your journey. Kokoro, the heart, it measures not time or distance, but care. The developers left it there on purpose, a small piece of themselves pulsing through the machine. Every time you smile, every time you feel peace, Johto's heart beats with you. Now, long after the world has moved on, the gold and silver light still flickers softly through memory. Maybe you hear it in the quiet hum of your console fan, or see it in the orange glow of evening through your window. Maybe it's just the echo of a song you once knew by heart. Whatever it is, it remains steady, a thread between you and something gentle. When you drift to sleep tonight, think of the way the wind moved across the Lake of Rage, or the way the bells of Ekrutiak shimmered above the roofs. Picture the calm, the balance, the slow rhythm of a world built not for competition, but for peace. Remember that even in data and pixels, human warmth can last forever. The memory doesn't fade, it simply waits for you to visit again. And as your thoughts quiet and the night deepens, Imagine the golden light returning one last time. The screen fades in, the music hums softly, and the journey begins again, not with noise, but with calm. You're home in Johto once more, where the world turns slowly, where the heart never forgets, and where peace lives in every gentle sound. Somewhere deep inside the code, Johto still runs. The battery may fade, the cartridge may yellow, but the world itself never stops looping in silence. The clock turns, the routes shimmer, and the music hums quietly, waiting for you to wake it again. It's strange to think of a world suspended between memory and machine, existing only when someone remembers. Yet that's what makes Johto eternal. It lives through you. The wind that sweeps across Route 29 carries faint traces of flute notes from the forest. Those notes are built from a single, five-tone scale that repeats endlessly without dissonance, chosen to sound like the breathing of a sleeping creature. The composer once said he wanted the route to feel like the sound of a heart resting. When players walk that path for the first time, most never notice the rhythm, but their minds did it calm them unconsciously. If you watch the reflection on the Lake of Rage long enough, the ripples form a looping pattern shaped like an infinity symbol. It's subtle, only visible during the in-game morning when the sun's angle aligns perfectly. That pattern was placed intentionally, encoded as a visual blessing, a quiet symbol of balance that mirrors the region's theme of harmony. Every world since has hidden something like it, a small infinity somewhere in its maps. Johto's forests were drawn with deliberate imperfection. No two trees are exactly the same shade. The artists varied their tones by 1 or 2 pixels to mimic the irregular light that filters through real canopies. They said the slight difference makes the world look alive. When you move, the forest appears to breathe. It's another example of how much care was given to details most would never see. To Johto's creators, those invisible moments were what made it real. When night falls in Ekrutik City, the bell tower's lights flicker between gold and white. The game's code calls this soul shimmer. It happens in a perfect 12-second loop, one light fading as another brightens, creating a slow pulse across the screen. Players see it as atmosphere, but the developers said it was meant to represent the heartbeat of the region itself. Each pulse is Johto breathing, every light a memory rekindled. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, there's a hidden dialogue line in the background scripts for the Kimono Girls Performance Hall. It reads, "If they stop dancing, the wind will forget its steps." The phrase doesn't appear anywhere in the game, yet it sits coded just beneath their animations. That poetic fragment was left as a developer's signature, a reminder that beauty isn't just what we see, but what continues unseen. Johto's architecture remains one of the most human aspects of any Pokemon region. The pagoda-style roofs in Ekrutik were built with proportional harmony inspired by classical Japanese temple design, following a real mathematical ratio known as yohaku, meaning the space left empty for spirit. The artist described this concept as the soul of Johto, leaving just enough silence between things so that the world could breathe. Even in later remakes, the programmers refused to automate the region's shadows. Every lamp, every roof tile, every corner of light was manually placed. The director said, "Johto's light must be touched by hand." That statement became a quiet rule in Game Freak's art team for years afterward. When you care for something by hand, the world remembers. One of the last unused sound files in Johto's archive is titled Last Morning. It's a short tune, only 16 seconds long, built from flutes and distant bells. The melody fades before resolving, leaving a feeling of endless dawn. Masuda confirmed years later that it was meant to play when you woke from saving at a Pokemon Center for the final time, but the feature was scrapped. Still, the tune survived, tucked into the code like a whisper of goodbye. If you listen carefully to the save chime in the remakes, a faint note echoes exactly 1 second later, so quiet it's almost inaudible. That echo is a hidden Easter egg called the second bell. It was programmed by a sound designer who said it represented the memory saving you back. That idea that the world remembers you, too, became one of Johto's lasting philosophies. There's a single unused sprite animation of the player standing still and blinking at the stars. It's not tied to any cutscene, just hidden in the files, facing upward. Some think it was meant for a night camp sequence that never existed. Others believe it was simply an artist's message, that even in silence, there's wonder worth looking up to. Many years later, when Johto's creators revisited their work, one of them said something simple. We wanted players to rest, not rush. That idea has quietly shaped every peaceful game since the ones that let you wander, pause, and breathe. Johto taught an entire generation of developers that calm could be gameplay, and now, decades after its first sunrise, it still waits the region of gold light, silver lakes, and soft wind. The data might fade, the hardware might sleep, but the feeling endures. Every time someone hums the root music under their breath or dreams of that distant horizon, the world flickers awake again. Johto was never just a chapter in a franchise. It was a promise that peace could be powerful. It was the moment when games learned to whisper instead of shout. And even now, when you drift towards sleep and your mind begins to blur, you can still feel it, the slow turning of a gentle world, the echo of a bell, the warmth of a memory that refuses to leave. Somewhere, the clock resets to dawn. Somewhere, the air glows gold. Somewhere, Johto breathes.